Oh, how
Thank you.
amazing that you're here to talk about not just this amazing devotional that you wrote, but also about your story. And I'm so excited to hear about that flight attendant story and how you shared the gospel with so many people. So, I love that this whole story started with a ticket to an event that wasn't even open to the public. So, how
Right.
did you even get that ticket?
Well, I was a big fan of Kathy Lee, and I heard that she was going to Nashville, and she had just written a song called "The God Who Sees," and Nicole C. Mullen had sang it, and it is one of the most beautiful songs. I encourage everyone to go hear it, especially if you're a woman. It just wraps Jesus's arms around you, and you just feel like it's a song about your life. It's just beautiful. And they were going to be at the Ryman in Nashville, and I got two tickets for that. And then I was online looking up who else was singing because it was called a Thousand Voices. And this other event came up for the night before, and it was a dinner with Kathy Lee, and you got like her book and a few other little things. And I got a ticket for that, and it was kind of an expensive ticket, but I got it. And 5 minutes later, I get a call from them, and they said, "How did you get this ticket?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't know. I was online. I explained, how I did it. I said, I really don't know." And they said, "Okay." And they didn't tell me why they were calling. They just, I thought they were just thanking me for for buying the ticket. And so I got the tickets, or I got one ticket to that event. And then fast forward, the girl that was supposed to go with me for the Ryman event could not go. And so then I called my sister. My sister said, "Sure, I'd love to go with you." And I told her about the other event, but I told her, "You don't have to get a ticket for that event the first night because it's a little expensive." And she called me back and she said, "No, I'll go ahead and purchase a ticket." So she got a ticket with me. And had it not been for her, I would never have met him. She's a Texas girl and very friendly. And they were standing in line, and she started talking to him. I'm in. I'm in going to the restroom and getting my tickets, and I come back. She's talking to this gentleman, and I just thought, "Oh, good, she's found a friend." She just always has friends. Everywhere we go, she has a friend. Anyway, so then we go to that event, and then after the event, Joe walks up to us after we're waiting in line, or we're waiting outside. Let me start over. Um, we are outside waiting for our Uber, my sister and I. And Joe walks up and he says, "Where are you ladies going?" And we said, "Well, we're going back to our hotel." And he said, "Well, how far is your hotel?" And we said, "I don't know, a mile and a half." And he said, "Well, cancel your Uber." And I said, "No, I'm not going to cancel my Uber because I have 1 minute for it to get there." And he said, "Well, no, just go ahead and cancel it." And I kept saying no. And he was behind me and he reached over my shoulder and canceled it. And I was a little bit upset with him because I thought, well, now I'm going to have to pay for an Uber that I didn't get. But then I felt bad for the person, the Uber driver coming, and I wasn't going to use the Uber. So we got in the car, and what was supposed to have been probably more of a 5 minute drive ended up being about a 15-minute drive because of lots of construction. So we got to know him a little bit better that way. And then the next night, God gave us another opportunity to meet, and I had an extra ticket for that. And he was sitting behind me a few rows back. And I asked him, I said, "You want to sit up here?" And he said, "Sure." So we got to visit a little bit more and get to know each other a little bit better. And then we went on our merry way. And he travels quite a bit because he's in media. And every time he would get on a plane, he would text me and say, "Well, are you on this plane? And what are we having for dinner?" And he would just, make silly jokes. And so we would go back and forth. And he had said, he said, "Well, if you're ever in Newark, call me." And I said, "Well, I'm never in Newark. I try to avoid Newark at all costs because I'm from Houston. And usually I go Houston to Newark and I turn around and I go back to Houston. I don't ever have a layover in
Mhm.
Newark." And it had been about 4 years since I'd had a layover there. So we just text back and forth. And then one day I was on what is called reserve at that point in my career. And so I was on call 24 hours. And it doesn't sound very exciting, but it became very exciting because my walk with the Lord grew closer because life was full of surprises. I didn't know where I was going, who I was going to meet. And it was wonderful to get up in the morning and go, okay, God, surprise me. Where are we going to go today? Who do you want me to meet? Just wherever you want to go in this world, I'll go with you. And I just want to, share Jesus's love with everybody. And I was praying about my schedule, and I just blurted out, okay, God, well, if you want me to meet Joe again, give me a layover in Newark. And I went to bed, and I got up in the middle of the night, looked at my schedule. And at that point, I had nothing on my schedule for the following day. And I got up in the middle of the night, and I had a layover in Newark the next day. And I will tell you, as a woman, a single woman of 17 years, it put a lot of fear in my heart. I was like, I know what I said. I don't think I really meant it. I changed my mind. So I was kind of bargaining with the Lord for a few minutes. And then I thought, okay, I just prayed this prayer 6 hours ago and you answered it very quickly. So I emailed Joe and emailed him and said, I'm going to be in Newark tomorrow night if you want to have dinner. And the next morning, I was on my way to Mexico, and we had just shut the door on the plane. And I got a text from him saying, sure, I'd love to have dinner with you. So I went to Mexico, then went to Newark. And when we landed in Newark, as we were descending, I could see it was snowing. And so I texted him and I said, please don't come out in the snow. We can reschedule this. And he said, well, can I call you? And I said, absolutely. So he called me. And of course, if you're not used to talking to men on the phone, it's kind of awkward if you haven't really been in that situation. It was kind of like being a 16-year-old and a boy calling you. It was very awkward. And he had been, his backstory is he had been married for 37 years. His wife had MS, and then she passed from breast cancer. And she had been in a wheelchair for 17 years. So he had a pretty hard life.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of awkward for both of us talking to each other because it was just unfamiliar. And he asked me if I'd ever marry again. And I said, no, I'm married to Jesus, and that's that. Jesus takes care of the widows and the orphans, and my name is written right there. And so and it took him by surprise what I said, but he said, well, if you ever want to talk about men, well, call me. And I thought, well, that's just very odd. So we talked another 5 minutes. We hung up the phone, and I said, okay, God, I don't know why I talked to him, but I felt like I did what you wanted me to do. So fast forward a few weeks, and I am in the process of moving in with my daughter. She's getting ready to have a baby, and we felt like her house was big enough for me to move in, and I could be a nanny / flight attendant. So I'm going through boxes and memories, and I just got really overwhelmed. And I remembered that awkward question, or what he had said. He said, if you want to talk about men, well, call me. So I emailed him, and it was kind of interesting because I never had really shared my story with too many people. Just my closest friends knew my story. And I just sat down and wrote my story and said, well, you said, if you have any questions, let me know. So I was asking him questions and thoughts about my life. And he said, well, can I call you tonight? And I said, absolutely. So we get on the phone that night, and it was a totally different, it was just, Jesus was in the conversation in a powerful way. And I felt Jesus's presence, and we just really shared our lives. And it was just like being with an old friend,
Oh,
very different conversation. And he said at the end, he said, "Can I pray for you?" And I said, "Yes." And he begins to pray, and it's as if Jesus is just holding me, saying, "You need to hear all this." So he prayed this beautiful prayer blessing over me, and I received it. We hung up. I was trying to write down everything he had said. I thought I need to reread this. And I wrote down what I could remember. And then the next morning I woke up and he had sent me an email. And in the email was the prayer that he had prayed for me. He said, "I just thought I'd write this down for you so you could hear it again." So he sent me that email. And then a few weeks later, he was going to LA, and I was meeting some friends in LA, so we decided to meet for dinner, and then the rest is history. So we've been married almost 5 years.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. I love God's
Quite the
intervention.
surprise. Quite the
Yeah, I
surprise.
love, don't you love God's intervention? How he just leads you along and you're like, no, I don't want to go that way. Don't, no. And then all of a sudden you're there. You're going,
Yes.
okay, but you know what that is? That's giving up your will for his will.
Yes.
And that's really what it's all about, right?
Usually,
So,
if I say no, I know. If I hear the word no come out of my mouth, I know that that's probably something the Lord wants me to do.
yeah,
Usually,
yeah. I love that you both have strong backgrounds and that God put you together for times such as this, right? So many things
yes.
that you're doing in your lives. But so now, the thing that you did for a living as a flight attendant, it took you all over the world. So I'm going to start there because I really want to hear the story that you have in your heart about how you shared the gospel with different people.
Um, Most of the time, it was uh, I had one lady that in the middle of the flight, she had received a text that her sister had died. And we were doing our service, and all of a sudden, I hear this gasp. This lady just yelled out, and we went to check on her. And she said, "I just got a text that my sister died." And so I asked her, I said, "Well, I talked to her for a few minutes, and I said, 'Would you like for me to pray for you?' And she said, 'Sure.'" And she was and I knew she was just overwhelmed, and she was actually on her way to her sister's home. And so I asked her, I had a long layover, and I asked her, I said, "Would you like me to rent a car and I'll drive you there so you don't have to?" Because she was just so distraught because she was expecting her sister to die, but she was expecting to get there before she passed.
Mhm.
So rented a car and was with her that day until someone could get there to be with her during
Mhm.
that time.
Mhm.
And then probably the most memorable I had was a girl who was starting college. She got on the plane, and the minute we took off, she just fell apart. And I went to check on her, and she was just so distraught. And she said, "My mom is getting ready to pass, and I'm not going to be there. My mom told me to go to college because she was just starting college. So she had all of her, um, I'm trying to think what it's called. She didn't want her to miss any of the first days of college. She wanted her to be there for college. And so
Mhm.
she kind of forced her to go to college instead of being there with her mom. And her mom at that point uh, didn't know her, wasn't able to speak to her and stuff. So it was just a very hard situation, but she was on hospice. Um, and I bring her, there's an open seat in the front. So I bring her to the front to have her with me. And we start talking, and I realize she's a strong Christian. And
Mhm.
we just start talking, and she just has this beautiful, beautiful heart. And it was fascinating in the beginning. I was comforting her. And then I did my service. I came back and sat with her. And then she's speaking into my life. And she was saying, "I know you were here for a reason. And I know that I was meant to be on this plane." So I watched her go through college. We kept up with each other. And I checked on her on holidays to make sure she had a place to go. And So we just had this great friendship. And I always told her, I said, well, when you graduate, let me know and I'll be there for you. And so we just had this beautiful relationship. It was really special. And she's probably my favorite of all my stories. Yeah.
That's amazing. I
Yeah.
love that story. I love when God connects us up, right? Because you both had to encourage each other
Yeah.
and to lift up Christ and to make him known again, like just because sometimes we need that refresh, right? We
Right.
just need that refresh in our own lives. And so, all right, what's the one only God moment that still makes you laugh?
In my whole life? In my whole life. Okay. Well, meeting Joe. That's the one I chuckle about the most. Because I had gotten to a point where, especially with my schedule, I would wake up in the morning going, just, God surprised me today. I want God wings. I want you to surprise me. And he did all the time. And I would be watching for him all the time. And it's exciting. It's really exciting. And then also to see how God uh, just, I mean, this is a big surprise for both of us that we got married. And then it was a surprise that we actually are very, very compatible. Because I never would have thought I would have ever married in my, at that point I was 61 and he's 71. So yeah, it was a big surprise, but I'm grateful that God saw that we needed each
Yes,
other.
yes. And
Yeah.
so, all right. So you said God wink, right? Yeah, because that's a Kathy Lee statement, right? God
Yes,
wink. She
but
just
it's
did the God
books.
wink.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's books called God Winks, and I love those books. And it's
yeah,
kind of similar to my book. My book is more of a devotional, but I've always loved hearing people's stories. And
yeah.
there were points on the plane. I was on a small plane at one time where my chair and the first chair facing me was so close that my knees would hit the people's knees sometimes when they were really tall. It was very
Oh,
awkward. And sometimes I would talk to the people, other times I wouldn't. But sometimes I would say, well, what's your story? Because I was trying to break the ice. And so it was kind of when I started saying, well, what's your story? And then hearing people's stories. And everyone has a story.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes, everybody does. And everybody should tell their story. I always say that.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think we don't. I realize that in my own life that my closest friends know my story. But God gave us our stories and our lives so that we can share with others to give everybody. I mean, it's such a faith booster, is what I call it. When I hear someone's story, it gives me hope, and I want to pray. I want to pray bolder prayers and trust God more when I see what He's done in other people's lives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I say that to women all the time. Write your story out and tell
Absolutely.
it,
Yep.
and that way you can encourage people and bring more people to Christ, right?
Absolutely.
When did you most feel God guiding you in a hard time?
Well, I was married for 24 years, got divorced, and was divorced at the moment my children I became an empty nester. It was very unexpected. And I remember one day thinking, okay, well, I was a mom and a wife, and now I have a dog and a cat that I take care of. And so going through mourning that life
Hmm.
and just the loneliness when the house was filled with laughs and giggles and a lot of love, and then it being silent and just the loneliness was gripping. It was quite gripping.
Mm.
And I began to, the Lord taught me how to help me. I kept praying about, God, you've got to help me with this loneliness because it's just crippling. And I started singing. I would just turn on my worship music and sing as loud as I could in my home. And I realized one day, I was like, oh, the loneliness is going away. And so anytime I felt overwhelmed, lonely, I would turn on my favorite worship music and just sing to the Lord. It was a great lesson for me that singing to the Lord just took away that loneliness.
So why was it important to share other women's stories too? Like you have the book, there's you got Roma Downey in there, Karen Kingsbury. So you have
Yes.
all these, you have all these like wonderful, lessons in here and little stories. Why was it important for you to share them through this book?
Well, as women, we're just so busy with taking care of others, whether it's our parents when they're aging, or children, or our husbands, or it just seems like we're so busy taking care of others, and maybe that's just in my life, but it seems like it resonates with other people too. That we're all going through similar situations, and the fascinating thing was in this book is that um, I wanted to bring hope to women, but I wanted to encourage women that God, whatever season you're in right now, it could be the hardest season in your life, or it could be you could be going along and just have a prayer that you keep praying to the Lord and you just don't think He's going to answer, or He's not hearing you. And I want people to know that God sees you and He hears you. He loves you. He cares deeply about you. And He knows your heart dreams. He knows everything about you. Um, and you're never alone. And He sympathizes with our heartaches, and He forgives our mistakes. And sometimes that's a hard one, or it was in my own life, to forgive myself of mistakes I made. But realizing that my life could be a graceful combination of beauty and pain, and that God can bless it despite whatever mistakes I've made.
Here's the book, Written in Heaven, His Story, Our Lives, a 40-day devotional. Wonderful. And where can they get this book and find out more about you?
They can get this book pretty much anywhere, is my understanding. The fascinating thing, and one thing I did want to share, is that this book, it's incredible how God brought each of these women uh, that I got to share their stories. We had a list of women that we were thinking about, and many of them were Joe's friends. Uh, but a lot of them couldn't do it because they were writing their own books, or they were, doing a movie, or their ministry. They were very busy in their ministries. And so God ordained each one of these women to be in this book and share their stories. And then the other fascinating thing, and this was something I did not even think about till afterwards, I had prayed that God would give each woman whatever story He wanted them to share for the book. And it's remarkable that every story is quite different. There's not any that are the same. We do have two. One is about praying for your husband, or praying. She prays for her husband when she's a little girl, and then seeing God answer that prayer. And then there's two about getting married, and one of them is by Michelle Watson, and she was married in her 60s. But it's a beautiful story how she met her husband. But it's just, there's so many beautiful stories in here. And yeah, each story is quite different. And I just pray it will bless women and give them hope, uh, and just really give them a faith booster every day.
What would you like to leave my audience with today?
I really want people to understand that no matter what you're going through, and this life is hard, I mean, it is hard, uh, that if you go into God's word, He will speak to you in a bold and powerful way. And if you will just open yourself up and let go of your burdens and just release them and give them to Him, and pray the scripture, pray the Psalms, uh, whatever you're going through. David, he is very fascinating to me because he goes to the very deepest of the deepest. He just writes from his heart. And just like you were saying, if every woman would, write down their story, and then if you write down your story, you get to see where God has orchestrated. When you see it in writing, you can see how God has orchestrated your life. But just pray the scriptures. That would probably be my one take, is that praying the scriptures has blessed my heart deeply.